Hello everyone, starting tonight, we will bring you a weekly program on a multitude of topics. At Hyde Park, our latest program covering public policy, economics, diplomatic relations, as well as diversity and development. We will talk to opinion leaders, politicians, diplomats and academics every Thursday at 10:30 p.m. on Ada Derana 24/7. Tonight, US Ambassador Atul Keshap will be joining us in his first interview with a local television channel. Good evening. Tonight we focus on relations between Sri Lanka and the United States of America, and to discuss 70 years of strong diplomatic relations, we have with us a U.S. foreign policy personality who has served in the U.S. foreign policy for over 20 years. Over 2 decades of service, Ambassador of the United States of America to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, Ambassador Atul Keshap. Good evening and a warm welcome to our studios.
Good evening, Indeewari, and good evening to all of your viewers. It's great to be here.
It's an honor to have you here, Ambassador. I think 20 years of diplomatic service, a career diplomat. And here you are in Sri Lanka. I think for over 10 years you've been specializing in South Asia, working on affairs related to our region. And here you are in Sri Lanka, and we're indeed honored to have you here at our studio. So let's talk about your experience in Sri Lanka.
I've had a great time. There are so many memories. I first came here in 2006, and I was here for a very short stay for a conference. And I remember landing in Colombo late at night. All the flights come late at night, and it was very dark, and there was a lot of checkpoints on the streets on the way into the capital, and checking into a city very much sort of caught in the teeth of war. And I remember at the time that it was an incredibly beautiful city with the ocean right here on the doorstep. And I really enjoyed my stay, and I in fact brought my family back in 2007 for a very brief vacation. And I never thought I would ever serve here or have the privilege of being the American ambassador here, but it has been so much fun. My family and I have really enjoyed living in a Sri Lanka that is democratic, free, prosperous, with human rights for all, a post-war Sri Lanka that is working to achieve a bright future. We've taken full advantage. We've gone all over the island, and I felt very privileged to take my wife and my children and my broader family all over Sri Lanka.
And I think from then to now you've seen a major transformation in the country. But let's talk about your family. You lived in Africa for a long time also, and your father is Indian, and here you're serving as an American diplomat. Diversity.
It's a perfect American story. I have diplomats in my embassy from the West Indies originally, from Africa, from Europe, from all parts of Asia, Latin America. America is a country that is uniquely woven to be even stronger because of all of the diversity of threads that make up the American experience. I was born in Africa. I spent the first 10, 12 years of my life living in Africa, Asia, Europe. My father was a UN development official.
Right.
My mother had actually joined the Foreign Service of the United States in the 50s from her hometown of Newport News, Virginia. So for me, growing up in an international context felt very normal. As a kid, I went to school with children from 70 or more nationalities. So I love being an American diplomat. I think it's the greatest privilege of my life. And I love the fact that I get to be the ambassador here and share my enthusiasm for what makes America special. And one thing I love about Sri Lanka is it's also a diverse country. And I'll never forget watching the elections coverage of 2015 January. I was in the State Department, and my boss and I were watching on Twitter as all the updates came in. And one thing that really struck me in the days after that was this great feeling among Sri Lankans that the diversity of the country is its strength, that its ethnic tapestry makes it as unique as the United States, and that from that great strength an even brighter future can be forged. So I love all of the the opportunities that life has given me to live in different places. And it's been a really interesting career in the State Department. I've served in the Middle East, in Africa, in India as well, and now in Sri Lanka. Good times.
But in Sri Lanka, I think very close to India, Asia, you've been able to have a taste of the Asian culture, the South Asian culture specifically. But how do your children enjoy this? For over 20 years, I presume they've been traveling from place to place, from continent to continent. How do they put up with this? What is it for them to live with a diplomat?
You'd have to ask them. I think my son would tell you he misses baseball because we're Americans. We're not very good at cricket, although he plays a little bit. I've tried.
But do you follow cricket here?
Yeah, but you know, my problem is I love it. I love when they hit the sixes. I love the fact that, you know, it generally kind of looks like baseball, but I can't quite understand certain things. Sixes I get, fours I get. I will never understand, ever, bowling a duck. I don't get it. Leg before wicket, I can't understand the distinction. But I love the passion. I've been to a couple of cricket matches, thousands of people, so much enthusiasm. Your cricketers are national heroes. They're first, you know, known by their first name. In fact, in the whole South Asian region, that excitement is so compelling. You know, the attractiveness of cricket is exactly what we find in baseball. Team sport, bat, ball, stick, bowler. You know, we kind of get it as Americans, but we respect the passion.
Right, I think cricket has been a game that brought the society together, communities together right throughout, even during a 30-year conflict in Sri Lanka. You are a fan of marine life. I mean, you visit, you're very interested in conserving wildlife. Where does this interest come from? Have you been into wildlife conservation since a child, or is that something you developed during your visits to South Asia and maybe Africa?
It's a hidden passion, I think, because I grew up in Africa in a country called Zambia, which has suffered enormous depletion of its wildlife treasures over the past 40 years. And when I was a child, I you know, went to national parks just like we do here with the kids. I think the kids will tell you they love traveling around Sri Lanka to Wilpatu and Galoya, to Yala, of course, Udawalawa. We've been to all the parks and had such a great time. But I did that as a child, and I wanted to impart that to my children. And to answer your earlier question, I want my children to grow up as people who are culturally aware, as people who are culturally fluent, as people who can relate to other people, no matter what the diversity of their background. And part of that is traveling around. And if as part of traveling around we see a few wildlife sanctuaries, biodiversity is so important. We humans, you know, we are the predominant species. If we befoul our oceans, if we cut down all of our forests, if we destroy our wetlands that protect us from floods, what do we do then? What do we do? So I think creating an understanding and an awareness among people about the importance of wildlife conservation, because that also means habitat conservation, and frankly it means conservation of humanity. So I'm really passionate about it, and I respect the fact that Sri Lanka has done so much to protect its national treasures. You have visitors coming from all over the world to appreciate what you have, to contribute to your economy, and if you can sustain that, it'll make you a real leader in this field.
Certainly, and I think, Ambassador, you'd be a key resource person for Sri Lanka for advice in terms of mitigating natural disasters, especially with rainfall, landslides, and Sri Lanka seems to be prone to these southwest monsoon disasters. But going forward, I hear you adopted a dog in Sri Lanka.
We did. She's lovely. This dog and I, 6 a.m., we go out, walk around the flowers, enjoy the beautiful morning. She's a street dog, and we adopted her from one of the adoption clinics at the Good Market. She's wonderful. She's very sweet-natured. We've had her for over a year now, a little bit over a year. So she's grown up in the family.
How old is she now?
She's 1 year and maybe 2-3 months. And I have seen the children really become more compassionate as human beings because they have to take care of the dog. And the dog also is such a source of joy, you know, constant joy in the house. So whenever we leave, we're going to take a very precious reminder of our time in Sri Lanka.
Right.
and we'll cherish her.
Certainly. And I think, I mean, from Africa, Asia, you definitely take artifacts and pieces of art to remember your postings there. From Sri Lanka, you have, you call her Princess.
No, she is a princess. Her name is Lily.
Lily, okay, that's great. From Sri Lanka, you have Lily. Ambassador, I think I'd also like to ask you about the transition from Africa, Asia to Sri Lanka. The cultures are so different, and you said your children to be culturally literate. And in Sri Lanka, this culture is different from Colombo city, to the village, and then beyond, the north and the south and the west and east. We are very much a culturally diverse country, just as the United States, but a smaller version. What have you got to say about your experience here in Sri Lanka, especially about people living together in the country, and your observation?
So I love Colombo. I absolutely love it. One of the things I love to do is get around to the older parts of Colombo, because, as I said earlier, this is a very strong tapestry of different cultures and different ethnicities and different religions. I give my visitors to the city my patented half-day tour, and I take them all around the town. We go to Gangarama, we go to the Red and White Mosque, we go to the Stone Temple in Petta, we go to the Old Dutch Church, the Wolvendal Church. We see the layers of history, the layers of culture, the layers that have contributed to making Colombo one of the most amazing destinations for an urban traveler. This is true not only about the religious sort of harmony of Colombo and the multifaceted nature of the population. It's true of the decency, the basic decency of Sri Lankan people anywhere you go.
Right.
You know, as I said, we've been all over. I've been to places on the other side of Galoya where you won't see another human being.
Right.
We've been up into the mountains of the tea estates. Whenever we interact in the villages, we have such a great experience. I think there's that basic respect, harmony, tolerance that is critical to the future of our species, the future happiness of humanity. If Sri Lanka can embark upon a bright vision, a bright future is ahead of it. And that vision has already greatly begun. After the elections of 2015, you know, the U.S. is passionately committed to seeing Sri Lanka's democratic legacy become even stronger because of that decency, because of that diversity. It means a lot to us because we see in you what we like about ourselves, the diversity of our cultures.
Excellency, if you may talk to us about U.S.-Sri Lanka relations, 70 years of diplomatic relations, and I think we've seen some interesting developments over 7 decades. And you've been in Sri Lanka as you were posted in South Asia too. You overlooked regional affairs that also mattered to Sri Lanka and affected Sri Lanka.
Well, you're absolutely right. This is the 70th anniversary of our bilateral diplomatic partnership. But I love the fact that the first Americans who came here almost 2 centuries ago. In fact, more than 2 centuries ago. We had Yankee clipper ships that would come here packed with New England pond ice from Massachusetts, and they would exchange the ice for Sri Lankan graphite. And that graphite went into pencils that school children used in New England, in Massachusetts, New York, Boston, over 200 years ago. Our first Americans to come here came in 1816. We opened our first diplomatic presence in 1850. We've had diplomatic relations and an incredibly strong partnership since 1948. One of the crucial things about the U.S. relationship with Sri Lanka is not only that it's very multifaceted, but for 60 years we've had a development partnership that totals over $2 billion in bilateral aid. And all of that has been grant aid. There hasn't been a loan in there. We don't ask for it back. We don't dictate terms of interest or anything like that. It is a gift of the American people to see Sri Lanka be a truly strong and stable democracy, a good partner for the United States, and a pillar of stability and prosperity and democracy for the entire Indian Ocean region. So our engagement has been in virtually every field of human endeavor in Sri Lanka, all of it essentially as an investment by the American people in the happiness of the Sri Lankan people,
So
all of them.
Great. I'm sure there's been a major cultural transfer exchange since the 1800s. Ambassador, I think in the most recent years following the end of the conflict, American politics and policy has been more directed towards expecting Sri Lanka's expectations to comply with human rights standards. What are your views on Sri Lanka's current path to reconciliation?
Well, Indeewari, thank you for this question. I applaud the government for the leadership that they showed in 2015 and again in 2017 in joining hand in hand with the United States and with other well-intended international partners, including the United Nations, to co-sponsor a resolution that talks about the bright vision that the voters of this country have for a reconciled, peaceful, happy Sri Lanka. A Sri Lanka where there could be no recurrence of conflict or hostilities. A country where everyone can achieve their full potential. And a country that can be a real pillar of stability and a beacon of democratic freedoms. After many, many decades of hard times, tragedy, loss of life, almost in every family, we believe in that vision that the voters imparted of a brighter future. And so as you look at the UN process, as you look at the American partnership, we want to walk with Sri Lanka hand in hand, all of the people of Sri Lanka, to see that brighter future come true. And we believe that in co-sponsoring the resolution, the government showed a very great deal of principle and courage and a very positive sense of what the people of this country can achieve. We applaud it, we support it, we have invested heavily to try to see our relationship expand because we want your country to succeed. And the government is taking steps. There are certainly many more steps that need to be taken, but it's a Sri Lankan-led and a Sri Lankan-driven process that I am confident will lead to healing and a brighter future.
Great. And Ambassador, I think the view about American policy towards Sri Lanka is divided within the country. There's an opposition and there's also pro-American policy group. But if we talk about where the aid goes in Sri Lanka, I understand that over $2 billion of aid have been diverted to develop Sri Lanka at various sectors. But if we talk a little about that and also about what expectations America has, you did mention that you have no conditions. Yes, but as I did mention, there is a divide in terms of views. How do we address this?
I think we really have a very positive vision, and we stick with that vision. I'll tell you where our aid goes. You know, there are a lot of things in the newspapers. I won't address those directly. I'm going to tell you where our aid goes. We are setting up a program that will ensure that young people in this country are empowered to develop a brighter future through entrepreneurship. We're going to set up offices in Kandy, in Hambantota, and Jaffna for young people to get the tools they need to empower themselves and create new businesses. We just launched the other day with the Prime Minister a dairy program that's going to help small farmers all around the country to boost their milk yields, increase dairy production for the whole country, reduce imports, and frankly, boost nutrition.
Right.
You know, we have a program to help rural economic growth, including job growth all around the rural areas of this country. If Sri Lanka isn't prosperous, it can't achieve that bright vision of the future that the voters have dictated for their leaders. So our aid is very much at the grassroots. We believe in empowering people to help themselves, and this builds on a strong legacy of aid that was in infrastructure, in healthcare, in irrigation, and in so many other places that have helped build the modern and relatively prosperous country of Sri Lanka today. So I'm very proud of our record. We think very carefully about how we engage. We do it respectfully and with full collaboration and partnership with the government of Sri Lanka and the people of Sri Lanka. And we're good friends. We don't ask for anything back.
Right. And if we talk a little more about Geneva and the UNHRC, I think this is something Sri Lankans speak about when we talk about the US post-conflict. Ambassador, I think the Prevention of Terrorism Act, this was something that the US was very keen on and very observant. What are your thoughts now?
So I want to applaud the government for having done a lot of things that are very important. And you know, tone is so important in life. When this government came into power, I was amazed to be one of the people privileged to be in the stands at the Independence Day in 2016 after I got here as an ambassador. And I saw people, grown people, weeping to see the national anthem sung not just in Sinhala, but in Tamil as well, and for the first time at a state function in almost 50 years. And that is the power of reconciliation. That is the power of healing after so much trauma and tragedy. I look at the Office of Missing Persons. I look at the Right to Information Act. I look at all of these initiatives to enhance democracy, enhance transparency, empower the citizen, ensure the freedom of the media, to ensure that people have freedom of conscience, to guarantee their basic freedoms, to ensure rule of law. These things are so important. So the PTA, or what, you know, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and however it evolves within your system, is something that not only the U.S. but also other partners, like-minded partners, but also the Sri Lankan government has committed to through the UN process. And we do think that as Sri Lanka gets into a post-war phase and solidifies and strengthens its democracy, it is up to Sri Lanka to sort of move along on these things that it's committed to do. We would like to see more steps taken, and we think that as the Geneva framework moves forward, not only will the United States walk hand in hand in full partnership with the people of Sri Lanka, but we are certain that as that happens, there will be a very important and cathartic process of healing that will be good for the people and will take this country to a brighter future.
Right, Ambassador, I think before we go in for a short break, I'd also like to speak a little about aid. Again, I think the United States, the largest trading partner for Sri Lanka, that's where most of our exports go to and where foreign exchange is from. And disaster relief, I see that $85 million for disaster relief have been spent over the years by the American government. But if we also talk about efforts for reconciliation, would aid be allocated for efforts to support reconciliation, to bring communities together? I understand that most of the efforts from the $2 billion that have been spent over the 70 years have been diverted to empowering rural life and youth empowerment. But is there anything specific that the U.S. looks at in terms of reconciliation?
Indeewari, that's a great question, and you've thrown a lot of important contexts, or rather questions on the table. Here's what I would say. Whether you look at American aid or European aid or aid from the World Bank or the ADB, which is loan aid, as opposed to grant aid, which is what America gives, and we're the #1 grant aid partner, our aid is virtuous. It is deployed in full consultation with the government and with the people. It is designed for positive impact. It is transparent, and the highest levels of ethics and transparency come along with our aid. We ensure that because those are our values. And so my feeling is, in all of the various places where we're trying to help, including in the areas of reconciliation, what you can be assured of and what viewers can be assured of is that aid from these like-minded countries, including the United States, is always going to be virtuous. It's always going to be with the well-being of the Sri Lankan people first and foremost, transparent and ethical. And in some cases where it involves loans, like from the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, or the World Bank, it'll be on terms and that are extremely concessional and, frankly, take into account the business value or the rate of return that could be expected in investing Sri Lanka's money into that project. So I feel very good about the whole waterfront of bilateral aid by the U.S. and by a lot of our like-minded partners and friends.
Right. Do you have plans, in fact, to divert these funds for development, the development process? Because something we talk about is tangible aid, to see tangible development. But is there any plan to fund roads, buildings, major developments from the United States?
Well, we're in a discussion with the government about potentially concluding a Millennium Challenge Corporation partnership. And this is an ongoing discussion. It involves very detailed analysis of where the needs are as defined by Sri Lanka and by the government of Sri Lanka. Once we get to a point of definition, we can announce something, but we have to keep talking. If we get there, it'll be one of the, I think it'll be the largest grant aid ever given to this country.
Right.
And it could be really transformative in helping Sri Lanka move to the next level of development. The issue I think that you're also asking about is about sort of how we go about it. Let me give you one example of impact. Very quietly, as part of our ongoing disaster relief assistance, we have been helping with the Disaster Management Ministry on detection of landslide risk, working to ensure that people who live in vulnerable areas can get the warning they need to move out in times of heavy rainfall. That is not a perfect process. It's not an exact science, but we do it because we want to try to save lives, and we recognize the need. We've also helped with dengue diagnosis in a way that rapidly gives the results so that treatment can begin quickly for those who are actually impacted, and we think that has helped save many lives in Sri Lanka. So we do these things because we think that overall, if Sri Lanka succeeds, becomes a good, stable partner for the world, a democratic beacon, especially after war, the whole world succeeds.
Your Excellency, I think we've been talking about American aid, American culture in Sri Lanka, but something very important is how American businesses have been operating within Sri Lanka and been a part of the development of this economy. Before we talk about ongoing businesses, what challenges do you think for incoming investments, foreign direct investments to Sri Lanka? Because I'm sure there are many American countries who wish to set up their ventures here.
That's a great question. You know, we've been an Indo-Pacific country for a couple of centuries, and I love the fact that we've had business people coming here for 200 years. Our American business presence here goes back in the modern era at least 60 years. And as you mentioned earlier, we are the #1 export destination for Sri Lanka. I think it's something like $3 billion in exports a year that support tens of thousands of jobs here. We would love to see that become more of a bilateral two-way trade. One of the things that I would really like to see growth in is the amount of American businesses that can work here and contribute to the prosperity of your country and my country. Our companies bring world-class values of transparency, of ethics, of environmental responsibility, of managerial excellence, technological and design innovation. One thing that perhaps your viewers might not be aware of, Indeewari, is that our companies worldwide are subject to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It's a law in the United States that makes it criminally sanctionable for them to engage in any corrupt practices or bribery with any foreign officials. As a result of this law, which very much is in keeping with American values, our companies make sure that they do not engage in any untoward activity. And when they look around the world with all of the money that they have to expand their operations, to enhance shareholder value, to build mutually profitable expansions, they look for business ecosystems that are high trust, that have very clear rules, that have quick arbitration and impartial arbitration of disputes, that have a degree of stability, that have a degree of predictability, that have an ethical ecosystem where there isn't any expectation of favors outside the deal, because that scares our companies off. So our companies go where they feel that there's a level and fair playing field where they can operate within the very strict parameters of ethics that are required of them by the American government, by their shareholders, and by the American public. And when they do that, and I've been all over the world to 65 different countries. I was the U.S. ambassador for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. When American companies settle into a country, they bring these high standards and they lift the standards of the entire economy. So we have world-class American companies that are here. I'd like to see more of that happen. I would like to see those standards that we like really be available to our companies. And frankly, I think with regard to transparency and corruption in Sri Lanka, more could be done. And we would love to see the
Yes.
government continue to take steps on strengthening rule of law, enhancing transparency, cleaning up the sort of the level playing field to make it easier for all to access. I think the government's leadership on opening up the economy, on sort of recognizing that countries like Vietnam or Malaysia or Singapore have moved ahead and that Sri Lanka needs to catch up is actually really good. It's not easy. A lot of people will complain, especially those who have sort of, you know, a pretty good thing going, but it holds the whole country back if the government protects certain champions, because it restrains people from achieving their full potential. It keeps wages low, and so my feeling is a little more opening up, a little more sense of competition of how Sri Lanka stacks up in the broader region would be very helpful. And I see the government taking steps, and I see the rhetoric coming from ministers, and I think they're on the right track.
Right.
But more could be done.
What do you think is the sentiment of the American people and the American businesses who look at Sri Lanka as a possible business place? Do you think they are convinced about Sri Lanka's efforts to tackle corruption and to create an ethical place for businesses?
Ours is a very laissez-faire system. That means that the government establishes the rules of the market, and then the market basically functions, and those who do well succeed and those who don't do well fail. It's a bit of a different philosophy from sort of ensuring that everybody succeeds to some extent. What happens in the American system is that you then have real champions. You look at all these companies like Apple and Microsoft and Google and Facebook, they didn't even exist 15 years ago. Well, Microsoft did. But you see the point that in our system, we create the rules. We create a fairly fair and transparent system, and then the market creates champions based on the value of their work. We would love to see more of that kind of system in countries where we do business, including in Sri Lanka. And all we're asking for is a level playing field. Look, we've been an Indo-Pacific country for a long time. We believe in a free and open Indo-Pacific. We believe in transparent values. We believe in a global operating system that is beneficial to all. I win, you win, everybody wins. The United States government, American taxpayers, even the United States Navy in the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean is helping ensure an open operating system, a global operating system that is accessible to all, fair to all, and ensures the prosperity of all. We believe in peaceful resolution of disputes. We believe in a rules-based order. We believe in a bright future for all of humanity based on all of us sharing the burden of sustaining this global operating system. That's true of our businesses as well. If they can be part of a transparent and fair system, they do very well. They're world-class competitors.
Great. Something you mentioned about IT development. I'd like to ask you, America has been an example for economic development with information technology advancements. But in Sri Lanka, I think we have made great advancement, but we are yet to achieve greater heights. What support does America want to give Sri Lanka in this area? Would American IT businesses would like to engage in ventures in Sri Lanka to set up partnerships? What is the way forward?
You know what I've seen in Sri Lanka is that you have world-class graduates from some of your universities in the IT field and computer sciences. You also have a really strong innovation talent pool. And what I'm seeing in the IT space is that Sri Lankan companies can't scale up the way that, say, Indian companies can do. And they don't necessarily have the skills that the Filipinos bring in the BPO segment. But what Sri Lankan companies are doing, and Sri Lankan computer scientists and engineers, is they're bringing world-class design and construction of applications. And this can be front side of the business or middle or back of the business, but what they're doing is really, really, really neat. There are a good number of American companies that have recognized this. And my appeal to Sri Lanka would be facilitate that. You know, make steps, take steps within your system to help that reputation grow, because it's good for American companies. They have the need. they find it fulfilled here in certain companies. I've certainly given speeches on this where I've said,
Right.
you know, maybe Sri Lanka one day will be known not just for tea, but for IT.
That's great. I'm sure we'll be there, but I'm told that's all the time we have. But before we go, I think you've spoke so passionately about Sri Lanka wildlife and the nature here in Sri Lanka. You speak a lot of languages. Have you learned Sinhalese or Tamil?
Those are both very difficult languages for me. I know a couple of words. I know Vanakkam, I know Yamu Yamu, which is my favorite expression. It's been great living here. I really wish I had had the time to learn both of the languages before I came. I think it would have made for a much more rich experience. But the memories are marvelous. This is a great country. It has a bright future. And we look forward to another 70 years of U.S.-Sri Lanka partnership. So Indeewari, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Nice
And
of you.
Ayubowan.
Ayubowan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We had with us His Excellency Ambassador Atul Keshap, the U.S. Ambassador to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed the show. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.